Atmospheric perspective.
It's art time with Mr. Mayberry. Let's get busy.
Welcome to Art Time with Mr. Mayberry. Today we're going to take the landscape drawing that we did last week and use watercolor paint to create atmospheric perspective. What is atmospheric perspective? It's creating a sense of space within your picture. Last week we learned some tricks that artists used to help us create that sense of space. One of them was overlapping. Things that are closer to you cover up things that are farther away. Another was size. Things that are close up look large and things that are farther away look smaller. And the third that we did last week was placement. Things that are higher up on the page also look farther away than things that are down lower on the page. Today we're going to be using color to create an extra sense of atmospheric perspective. You'll find out that things that are lighter in color look like they're farther away, and things that are darker in color look like they're closer to us. So let's get started. It's time to paint. Okay, today we'll need the paper that we did the landscape drawing on. And before we start the painting, I want to point out a few things. Since last time, I made some decisions to change a few things on my drawing. Before I had a river that was going from the background to the foreground. I decided, because it was so close to the cabin, I decided to make it a road instead. Also, I changed the course just a little bit. Instead of curving down here towards the bottom corner, I decided to make it go back down to the right. And in that way, your eye will continually be moving in this picture. It'll go up with this branch and then down and then back with the road. So I went ahead and changed that, and because it is a road, I made some ruts here in the road. Also, I added a mailbox. I straightened up my log cabin here just a little bit, added some end circles on the end here where the logs you might see the end of the logs, and I added some lines here in the window and actually put a door on there. So I made some changes there. Also in the background, I added some more mountains along the back. And one other thing here, a big thing, instead of having two smaller trees, I decided to combine them and make a larger tree trunk, and then I widened my branch here just a little bit. So those are all changes that I did since the last time we looked at this picture. So that's what I did with the picture. Now for today in the painting, some things of course you'll need watercolor, and watercolor paint, and in order to make that work, you will need a container with water. I wouldn't fill it completely, just in case you spill it. It's a lot easier to clean up half a container than it is a full container. And then also you'll need soft bristle brushes that are used for watercolor. You might use a larger one for larger spaces. If you have the ability to use different sizes, you might use a smaller one. You might need a smaller one for details, okay, little tiny areas. And then I have kind of a medium-sized brush. So I'm using, these are actually a number 2, a number 4, or 3, or you could use also a 4th. And then this actually is a number 12, so it's a lot larger. But I would, if you have a chance to have different sizes, depending on what your picture looks like, you might want at least a smaller one and a larger one. Okay, so that's brushes. You might want to cover your workspace. We will be painting out to the edges, so you might want to cover the table that you're working on so you don't get paint on it. And you might even want to wear an apron. Usually with watercolor paint, there's not as much trouble as spilling on clothes or getting it on your shirt or whatever, but just to take precaution, you might want to wear an apron anyway. Now today, instead of taking you through this step by step on how to paint everything in here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and paint this. I'll come back and show you and explain to you why I painted what I painted and what it looks like, so that you'll see a finished product and then know how you might go about using color within your picture. So as soon as I get that painted, I'll come back and share that with you. Okay, instead of painting all of it and then showing it all to you, I decided to work this in stages. First thing I did was to work on the background, to paint the background. And the colors I chose were orange for like a sunset, or it could be a sunrise. And then I used some blue on the upper end of this where it is gradually, it's going from really light to darker in the sky. So either, again, it's in the morning and the sun is just coming up and the darkness is being pushed aside by the colorful sunrise, or the sun is setting and the sky is turning beautiful colors as the darkness kind of creeps in. So this could work either way. Then also I used purple on the mountains here in the background, and then left the top parts where the snow is on top, left that blank or left that empty, so it would appear white. Now, when you're working with watercolor, things that you have to be concerned about are if you have two colors beside each other and you want them to stay separate colors, for instance, like with the purple and the orange, I didn't want them to blend at all. You might want to let one color dry a little bit before you paint the second color. But now in cases where you do want them to mix, like here in the sky I wanted to mix those, then it's okay to have them both wet at the same time, because then you are going to mix them. Now with this I had to be careful because you can mix orange and blue and get brown, and I didn't want that in the sky. But what I did was to make sure there was a little bit more paint on the brush towards the bottom where I wanted there to be a darker color, and then less paint as I went up. And then I painted, you could start with the blue and paint it first and then paint the orange and then mix them in the center. But just gradually I mixed them together and try to add a little bit more orange than I did blue, so that the sunset would show up brighter than the dark sky at the top. Also, I found that there was quite a bit of water on the paper as I was painting, and quite a bit of color in some places, more than what I wanted. So I used a paper towel, dabbed it with the paper towel to dry off some of the really wet areas. So this is the first part of the painting is the sky. Again, it's still pretty light in the background. So that's the first part. Now I'll paint a little bit more and then I'll come back and share that with you. Okay, the next thing I did was to paint the ground, the grass, from the background all the way up to the foreground. Let's try to start off light, and I use a smaller brush around the detailed areas, and then by the time I got down here at the bottom I used a larger brush, but tried to make it a little bit darker by adding maybe a second or third coat to the bottom, or allowing there to be more paint on the brush also. I did both of those kind of things. You have to be careful when you have two colors beside each other. If you don't want them to mix, you might let one dry a little first and then go back and do the second one. Now on the road I wanted to paint the ruts a little darker here, so after I gave it a first coat I let that dry a little bit, and then I went back with in the ruts I added a little bit more paint on my brush than what I had to start with. So this is the background to the middle to the foreground, just the ground itself and the road. So that's what I've done on this section. I'll go paint a little more and come back and show you some more. Okay, now I've painted things in the foreground and in the middle ground. The squirrel, I started off with the squirrel and I tried to make him just a little bit darker than his surroundings, but not as dark as the tree. I made the tree a lot darker, mainly starting with on the edges, and then it gets a little bit lighter in the middle, but it's all darker than the background and the middle ground. Also, I worked on the cabin this time and painted that in, and the mailbox, and some smoke up from the chimney. And now I'm going to go back and do one more session here where I will add some more details here, add some black lines to kind of outline some things. And also I added a extra branch here. I thought that might look nice here, and it reminded me that if you make a change, don't try to erase on paper when it's wet, because that'll just tear a hole in your paper. Let it dry first, and then you can try erasing then. But sometimes watercolor will cover, if it's dark enough, it will cover certain flaws and all that you might have. So that's something I remembered as I was working on that. So this is how much I have done at this point. I'm going to work on it some more and I'll come right back. Okay, one last look at our watercolor landscape. What I did this time was to add some detail. I added some black lines for bark around the edge of the tree, of this close-up tree. One thing to note that I added some around the chimney, and you have to be careful not to make things too dark. It's pretty borderline on being messed up. But what I did, I tried to put a little dark area around the stones, and it seemed just a little bit too dark, because what'll happen is the things that are dark look like they're closer to us, and I mentioned that earlier. We're creating an atmosphere here, creating atmospheric perspective, so it makes it look like there's distance within this picture. By having things lighter farther away and darker close up, it creates that sense of space. Also, something else to note that I hadn't mentioned yet, we've talked about size. Things that get farther away look smaller. We've talked about placement, that things higher up look like they're farther away and things lower down look like they're closer. And also overlapping, that you can see all of things that are in the front and they cover up things that are farther away. Something else that I need to mention, though, is detail. Today we look at color and we look at detail. We look at the fact that things that are darker it's going to pull those out and make it look like they're closer up. I could also put things down here below, but and things that have more detail, things that are close up have more detail. You can see the fine lines, whereas the farther away it gets, things look fuzzier or less defined as they go farther away. Now, like I said, I could add something here, but there's something else to mention about watercolor painting or just artwork in general, is there comes a point when you have to look at it and say, that is finished. You can overdo things. You can do too much to a picture and make it go from looking nice to looking crowded, or just it looks almost like with something that you cook. If you cook it too long, it gets burnt. Well, it could happen with your artwork as well. You could actually overdo your artwork so that it goes from looking really nice to looking like there's something wrong with it. So I think I'm at a point where it's a good place to stop on this, and I hope you've learned a few things about watercolor along the way here, even though I didn't show you every single step along the way as I was working. So this is our project for today, a watercolor landscape. Well, that's all for today. If you'd like to show me the landscape you made, just paste it in the comments below. Remember to like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.
See you later. Hi, bye.
You could almost cut this atmosphere with a knife.